Hi guys, nice to have you back. First of all, please remember to subscribe to my channel and activate the bell, then you won't miss any of my videos. Thanks a lot for that. Super telephotography on a small budget is today's topic of my video. During my photographic everyday life, I almost never need focal lengths of 300mm or more, related to the 35mm format. From time to time, however, I attend motorsport events or air shows. Most of the time, I just bring back a few photos from there since my existing focal lengths ended at 300mm. Now, however, 3 events were just around the corner that I wanted to visit together with my children. This time the photo yield had to be better, at least in theory, by using a longer maximum focal length. Since I had almost 1.5 years to prepare, I played through possible combinations again and again in terms of the maximum achievable focal length of my now existing cameras. The result of my mind games I would like to present to you first. Of course I wanted to photograph these events digitally. So I had 3 possible cameras at my disposal: Sony A7III, Canon EOS 5 DSR, Olympus EF II. I left the continuous shooting speed out of my considerations. I started taking pictures in 1982. At that time I still transported the film manually with the quick release lever. Later I fell into a real speed frenzy by using a Canon EOS winder, because the winder offered a film transport of 2 frames per second. So even today, frame rates of 2 frames per second are enough for me. This might be different if I had to do photography for a living. Earlier I did not mention that I still own a Tokina 4.5 to 5.6, 80 to 400mm with Nikon F mount. I was given this lens as a gift some time ago, but I've never tried it. I could also only use it on an analog Nikon camera, so it didn't matter for my considerations. A combination that can be used digitally but doesn't offer autofocus would have been to use the Sony A7 III with the Canon NFD 4.0 300mm L. This lens offers fantastic performance already at open aperture, with maximum performance already reached at aperture 5.6. Simply great. Combined with Canon's specially designed teleconverter 2xa, which is intended for focal lengths from 300mm, this would result in a focal length of 600mm at effective aperture 8.0. I was thinking about it for a long time, because the lens is a dream. But in the end I said no to this combination, because I didn't want to give up autofocus. The same was true for the combination on the Olympus OM 10 Mark II, which you could already see in the video. Here, due to the crop factor of 2 times because of the sensor size, it resulted in a 1200mm at an equally effective aperture of 8, relative to the depth of field of aperture 16. But without a tripod this combination was not usable for me. And a tripod is too limiting for such events, and was therefore out of the question for me. In addition, I would also have to do without autofocus with this combination. Since I don't own any autofocus telephoto lenses for the MFT system of my Olympus OM E10 Mark II, this camera is definitely out of my considerations. However, due to the crop factor of 2, this system is generally suitable for super telephotography. In the analog days, this combination of a Canon EOS 1N with the Canon EF 5.6, 100 to 300mm L lens offered a great telephoto option. And paired with a 1.4 times teleconverter, the result was an 8.0 140 to 420mm, even with autofocus, depending on the teleconverter and camera used. The Canon EOS 1N with a Kenko teleconverter 1.4 times offered exactly this function. I was very curious to see if the Canon f5.6 100 to 300mm would also work on my 2 cameras, Sony A7 III and Canon 5 DSR, with Kenko teleconverters. Without teleconverters, the lens works without complaint with the Canon EOS 5 DSR, and also on the Sony A7 III, using the Sigma MC11 adapter. There are no restrictions at all when operating the lens on the Sony A7 III. On the basis of this equipment, I would like to present you my personal low-price solution, which lets me sniff a breath at the super telephotography. And yes, These combinations or camera side settings are of course no substitute for a real super telephoto lens, like a Canon EF 2.8, 400mm ISL, EF 4.0, 600mm ISL, or an EF 5.6, 800mm ISL. The following combinations are possible with this equipment, while retaining all lens and camera functions and result in the following super telephoto focal length. Canon EOS 5DSR, or Sony A7III, plus Sigma MC11 with EF 4.0 to 5.670 to 300mm and Kenko Teleplus Pro 301.4x teleconverter. This gives a 5.6 to 8, 98 to 420mm. All functions work fine. Canon EOS 5DSR, or Sony A7III, plus Sigma MC11 with EF 4.0 to 5.670 to 300mm and Kenko Teleplus Pro 302x teleconverter. This results in 8.0 to 11, 140 to 600mm. All functions work fine on the Sony A7 III. The Canon EOS 5DSR has sometimes significant focus problems. Canon EOS 5DSR, or Sony A7 III, plus Sigma MC11 with EF 5.6, 100 to 300mm AFD drive, and Kenko Teleplus Pro 301.4x teleconverter. This gives an 8.0, 140 to 420mm. All functions work fine. It should be noted that this lens does not have a built-in image stabilizer, so a stabilized image is only possible on the Sony A7 III, which has a built-in stabilizer on the camera side, but not on the Canon EOS 5DSR. Also, this lens has a first-generation autofocus motor AFD drive, which is clearly audible and focuses quite slowly. Canon EOS 5DSR or Sony A7 III, plus Sigma MC11 with EF 5.6 100 to 300mm, and Kenko Teleplus Pro 302x teleconverter. This results in an 11, 200 to 600mm. All functions work fine on the Sony A7 III. The Canon EOS 5DSR has sometimes significant focus problems. I had expected focus problems, because of the initial aperture of 11 in combination with the Canon camera. I was surprised about the possibility to use this combination without problems on the Sony A7 III. Great! Another way to subjectively extend the focal length of the lens is to use the crop mode. Especially with a high-resolution camera like the Canon EOS 5DSR, this is a good way to determine the image detail before taking the picture, and not to crop it on the computer after taking the picture. The Canon EOS 5DSR offers two options for this: 1.3 times or 1.6 times. Here, the 1.3 format, related to the 35mm format, with a sensor size of 27.9 by 18.6mm, is the shooting format used in earlier Canon cameras of the 1 series. Canon called this format APS-H. It was used in the 1D Mark II to 1D Mark IV models. These were designed for sports photographers, and offered advanced autofocus as well as shooting rates for the time. This was contrasted with the full-frame models in the 1DS series, which offered higher resolution, but slower shooting speeds. The Canon 1DX models combined the two series. The 1.6 format corresponds to the crop factor of the Canon APS-C models, with a sensor area of 22.5 by 15.0mm. Interestingly, the Canon EOS 5DSR always exposes the entire surface of the sensor, equivalent to the 35mm format, 24.0 by 36.0mm, even in crop mode. In the image editing program, the crop factor is either applied automatically or it can only be displayed, and you decide yourself if you want to use this image section, or if you want to apply another image section. In the Canon 5DSR viewfinder image, the selected crop factor appears normally bright, while the other viewfinder areas are darkened. This gives you a crop control before you actually take the picture. Of course, this procedure also changes the number of available megapixels or resolution when you apply the crop factor in image processing. The universal formula for determining the megapixels from the 35mm format to the crop factor is megapixels sensor divided by crop factor to the power of 2. Using the Canon EOS 5DSR as an example, this would be either 50 megapixels, divided by 1.3 to the power of 2, which gives about 29 megapixels, or 50 megapixels, divided by 1.6 to the power of 2, which gives about 19 megapixels. With these megapixels, it is possible to work very well, and larger expressions are also possible. For comparison, the data of the Sony A7 III Sony camera have a crop factor of 1.5, 24 megapixels, divided by 1.5 to the power of 2. This results in approximately 10 megapixels. Using the crop factors result in the following focal length impression. I deliberately write impression, because the focal length is of course equal to the values given on the lens, or due to the optical change of the lens focal length by the teleconverters. So you still have a comparison, at least from the image size of the subject, to true super-telephoto lenses. To calculate the image impression corresponding to lens focal lengths, the values of the lens or the values of the lens teleconverter combination must be multiplied by the crop factor. The depth of field does not change in this case, since the Canon EOS 5DS always exposes the entire 35mm sensor area, as already mentioned. Take a look at the table, the values are listed there. You can find this table for free download on my homepage, apertureonepointfour.com. What a bummer. What a hassle. After I had just taken some pictures with the Canon EOS 5 DSR, with the combination of Canon EF 4.0 to 5.6, 70 to 300mm and Kenko 1.4 teleconverter Pro 300, and so slowly enjoyed the Motorsport feeling, suddenly the autofocus and IS of the lens strikes. The autofocus only works in a range macro to about 15 meters. The IS has completely ceased to function. Yet this combination provided a very good focal length and autofocus speed and accuracy op. Damn. Due to the defect of the lens, I can unfortunately only show you 4 pictures that I was able to take with the Canon EF 4.0 to 5.6 70 to 300mm LIS. The options shown in this video are of interest to photographers like me, who very rarely need longer telephoto focal lengths like 300mm, and are looking for ways to avoid buying a special super telephoto lens, or a super telephoto zoom lens with 400 and more millimeters. The use of the crop factor does not affect the imaging performance of the lens used. With simpler teleconverters, such as the Kenko teleconverters used here, sacrifices in imaging quality must be accepted. Manufacturers like Canon, Sigma or Sony offer special teleconverters, then often called extenders, which are optically designed for selected lenses, and thus allow a better imaging quality than the universal teleconverters used here. At the end of the video, I show you some photos I took at the second Motorsport event with Sony A7 III, lens adapter Sigma MC11, and the old lens, Canon EF 5.6 100 to 300mm, which was launched already in 1987, and Kenko teleconverters. Thank you again for your interest and always good light.